So this week, we're going to talk about women in Judaism, not like who the women are, but what kind of decisions the women make. Actually, it's interesting that the women in Judaism make major decisions, whereas the men think that they're making major decisions, but the women really make decisions that affects generations and many, many different people. And what we want to do is I want to go through a little bit of history and show you that that's the case. Number one, who was the first woman in the Torah? Anybody? Who's the first woman in the Torah?
Eve.
Eve, right, Chava, exactly. And actually, it's interesting that in English, her name is Eve, which comes from evil, which I really don't like. That's why I like the name Chava better. And actually, Chava, Ava, you took Ava, which is actually probably the translation of Chava, because if you take the name Eve, it's not a good name. It basically means evil, that Chava was evil, but Chava was not evil. Chava was wonderful. We know that Adam and Chava lived in the Garden of Eden. And what happened in the Garden of Eden? God said to them, he said, I'll give you one mitzvah and I'll give you 3 hours to do that one mitzvah, which is don't eat from the tree of knowledge, only from the tree of life eventually. And that means if they ate from the tree of life, they would live forever. And if they ate from the tree of knowledge, they would know the difference between good and evil. Now, Chava, being a smart woman, understood that if she eats from the tree of knowledge, she will have a lot more merit, because when you do everything easily, it's a problem. Because each thing we do in life and it comes very easy, it doesn't really make us happy or joyous, or it's just so easy, like we don't appreciate it. You usually appreciate things that come a little more difficult. So she understood by eating from the tree of knowledge, she will know the difference, or actually not know the difference between good and evil. She would have to work on herself to figure out the difference between good and evil. In other words, nowadays, we have good and evil as an equal. And a lot of times we might think something is good, but sometimes it's not so good. So we make very, very difficult decisions. So Chava decided that she's going to eat from this tree, even though the snake convinced her, but she felt it was a good convincing, that it was something that would bring them more merit eventually, that they would be able to transfer the evil into good. And she was confident that she can do that, which was not very easy, because what happened when she ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? She gave it to her husband to eat too. It was her decision to do it. And so what happened at the end is that we, as the people in the world, now have to struggle to be able to overcome our evil inclination to get to the good. And this is what she brought into the world. So she actually made a major decision for the world. It wasn't a very simple decision. It wasn't about her and her husband eating from the tree of life, of knowledge of good and evil. She made a decision for the world's population, that they would have to work on themselves to overcome the evil and get to the good. So isn't that interesting? So she actually made a major decision. So that was the first major decision in the world. Now, if you go further, you see that we don't know much about Noah's wife, okay? Her name was Naamah. And actually, even the name Naamah means sweet and nice and whatever. So we don't really know that much about her, but we do know about the first Jew's wife. Abraham was the first Jew, and what was his wife's name?
Sarah.
Sarah, good. I actually will have to mute everyone because I do hear music in the background.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Okay. So if you want to answer a question, please unmute yourself. So Abraham and Sarah lived in Haran, and they left their household and they went to Canaan, which eventually would be Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so what happened? Sarah could not have children. She had Yishmael, not her, she didn't have Yishmael. Abraham had Yishmael from Hagar, who was a princess and a maidservant for Sarah. So Sarah had Yishmael from Hagar because she couldn't have her own child. And then she had her own child at a very old age. If we remember, she was 90 years old and she had Yitzchak. And at one point, she noticed that Yishmael was not a good influence for her son. So what did she do? She told Abraham, please send your son away. Interesting enough, Abraham didn't want to do it. And what happened after that? How did he end up sending Yishmael away? Anybody know? Okay, I gave you a minute to think, but I will tell you the answer. So God told Abraham, Kol asher tomar.
I didn't want to say, okay, sorry.
Excellent. What did you want to say?
That God said that if your wife told you so, you have to do so.
Right. Kol asher tomar lecha Sarah shma b'kolo. Everything that Sarah tells you, listen to her voice. In other words, when women are intuitive, they have an intuition. When she feels that Yitzchak is being influenced by Yishmael, you should listen to her and understand that she knows what she's talking about. She wants to educate her child in the right way. And if she feels that she wants to educate the child in the right way, yes, you should listen. And you know what? She is the mother of the Jewish people because she stuck up for her son and the continuation of the Jewish nation. And that's what happened. Yitzchak was the continuation of the Jewish nation. So did Sarah make a major decision for the world? Or she made a minor decision for her own child? Obviously, she made a decision for the future of the Jewish nation. Because if not for Yitzchak being brought up in the house of Abraham and Sarah without terrible influence from Yishmael, he was able to continue the Jewish nation. Okay, so that's Sarah. Sarah made a major decision in Judaism. Then after Sarah, who is the next mother? The mother after Sarah, who's the next mother?
Rivka.
Rivka, excellent. So Rivka had to make decisions too. What was a major decision that Rivka had to make? What did she just have to decide for the Jewish nation?
Yaakov should be first.
Yaakov, right? Yaakov should be the Bechor, the firstborn, and he should have the continuation, the heritage of the Jewish nation. How did she do that? When Esav came to his father and said, "Father, bless me," the father said, "Go bring me some food." He left, and Rivka very, very cautiously told Yaakov to go in and get the blessing, because she knew that the real heir for the Jewish nation was Yaakov. And that's what she knew very well. And that's why it's interesting to see that Rivka had the intuition to understand that Yaakov is going to continue the Jewish nation, and her decision was a really lifelong decision for her family and continuation of the Jewish nation. So that's a major decision, not a minor one. Then we have, after Rivka, who is the next mother that we know? Who goes next?
Leah and Rachel.
Right. Leah and Rachel. How did Leah and Rachel continue the Jewish nation? We know that Jacob wanted to marry Rachel, but guess what? He ended up with Leah. He told Rachel quietly certain signs, and she didn't want to embarrass her sister, so she gave it to her sister. Do you think that it was Rachel only that was in cahoots? It was also Leah. So both of them wanted a continuation of the Jewish nation. So he married Leah and then he married Rachel. So they both made that decision for the future. And the same thing, if we continue, we see that Leah had many, many children, and she brought a lot to the Jewish nation. And that's what Rachel knew. And that's why she gave up her place. And she understood that she will not be the only wife, that Leah needs to be the wife too. And that's how they will continue the Jewish nation. Then we have, after that, we have one of the sons of Leah was Yehuda. And Yehuda had a wife and two children. And the oldest son was married to Tamar. And then the oldest son passed away because he didn't want to have children or whatever the case was. And then Tamar married the second son. And again, the second son passed away. And so Tamar made sure that she left, and he didn't know what happened to Tamar, but it turned out that Tamar tricked Yehuda and had twins from him. And from those twins, which is Peretz and Zarach, comes Mashiach. So Tamar was also making a major decision to make sure that Yehuda would have the two children that would be the future of Mashiach, Peretz and Zarach. So from Peretz would come Mashiach eventually. Now, also another major decision was made, which is interesting. Joseph, when he went down to Egypt, he was in the house of Potiphar. Potiphar's wife, Potipharah, she thought that Joseph was supposed to have children from her, but it wasn't true. It was supposed to come from her daughter. And it's interesting that she tested Joseph, and Joseph did not go with her, but she put Joseph into jail. And because Joseph was put into jail, she made a major decision by putting him in jail. He was able to become, at the end, the second to the king. So she actually made a major decision in Judaism that because Joseph was able to become the second to king, he was able to save all his brothers and sisters. Sorry. And so then we have the Jewish people come down to Egypt. And one of the sons of Levi, his name is Amram. He married Yocheved, and Yocheved had a daughter named Miriam. And Miriam and Yocheved were Shifra and Pua, means that they were the midwives that saved many Jewish people, kids, boys, because Paro wanted to throw the boys into the Nile, and Yocheved and Miriam saved the boys from drowning. They would say that the mother had a baby too quick, so they couldn't kill the baby. So, but afterwards, he still made a decree and he said, this time the midwives are not going to come. There's going to be soldiers that are going to come and kill those babies. Yocheved was married to Amram, and Amram was the leader of the generation. And Amram said, let's not stay married, because if we have a child, the child would be thrown into the Nile River. We don't want to have kids. But his daughter, Miriam, came up to Amram and said, Amram, dad, or whatever she called him. Guess what? You, Paro, decreed against the boys. You are not only decreeing against the boys, but you're also decreeing against the girls. If you have a girl, it won't get thrown into the water. But why would you want that all children should die? Because you're not even going to try to have children. So you're killing everyone. So Amram listened to his daughter. He gave her a kiss and he went back to his wife. And who did Amram and Yocheved have after that? Who was born? Who was the child that was born after they got back together? Does anybody know?
Moshe.
Moshe, excellent. So Moshe was born to Amram and Yocheved, and he was born 3 weeks early, and it says that the house was lit up because he had so much holiness. And for 3 months, they were able to hide him because he was born 3 months early. After 3 months, it was a problem, because now what are they going to do? And Amram came up to Miriam and said, now what are you going to do? You see, you said that I should marry your mother, but look what's happening. So Miriam says, don't worry, everything will be fine. So she went down, her mother put the baby in a basket. Everybody left, but Miriam stayed there. She didn't give up. She said she's going to watch and see what happens to baby Moshe. And as we know, the princess Batya, the daughter of Paro, came down to the water and took Moshe out. And of course, Moshe did not want us to nurse from any of the midwives because he was supposed to eventually speak to God. So he couldn't nurse from a non-Jewish midwife. And Miriam came up and says, I can help you. I will give you someone to nurse your child for 2 years, and then you can take your child. So guess what? Yocheved, his mother, Moshe's mother, was able to nurse the child for 2 years and then gave the child back to Batya. So we see 2 people now, 3 people here making major decisions. We have Yocheved, we have Miriam, and we have Batya, even though she was daughter of Paro, but she made a major decision for the Jewish nation to save this child who's going to redeem the Jewish people from Egypt. So that's a major decision. Okay, so now Miriam is still in the picture. She hasn't given up. She knows that her brother, everything will be fine, although until he was 80 years old, he did not redeem the Jewish people. So she waited years and years until her prophecy would be fulfilled that he would redeem the Jewish people. So after that, Moshe took the Jewish people out of Egypt, and Miriam is still not out of the picture. What does she do? She doesn't just sit there and look at the walls. Miriam is amazing. She took the Jewish people, the Jewish women, and instead of just singing at the splitting of the sea, she had the Jewish women playing with tambourines and singing. And so they understood, the Jewish women of Egypt understood they were special. They understood how much happiness you need to have for God taking us out of Egypt. And they had extra emunah. Emunah means faith. So they had faith in God that God would take them out of Egypt. So they took the tambourines with them and they danced and sang at the Yam Suf. So that's a major thing for the Jewish people. And then also the reason the Jewish people had water in the desert was for what reason? Because of who? The Jewish people had water in the desert because of who? Because of Miriam. So in other words, God gave, it's called Be'er Miriam, the well of Miriam. Why was it called the well of Miriam? Because in her merit, the Jewish people had water and were able to survive. So it's also a major thing that the Jewish people survived in the desert. It's very interesting that last week it talked about Miriam, that she said something not very nice about her brother Moshe. If you understand that the first time she talked to Amram, which was her father, she told him to have another child. Guess what happened now? She didn't go to Moshe. She went to Aaron, her brother, her older brother, and she said to him, I don't understand why Moshe is separate than his wife. He should be together. And God said, that's not nice. You should have gone to Moshe directly. So God smote her with saras, which is in English called leprosy, but it's not really leprosy. It's a spiritual disease. And she had to go out of the camp for 7 days. And because of who she was, God said the Jewish people should wait for 7 days for her. So that's Miriam. Okay, so let's go down and see what other major decisions are made by women. We know, okay. I'm sorry. So we know that there is the next person that made a major decision was a woman named Hannah. Does anybody know who Hannah is? Who is Hannah's son? Anybody know? Okay, we talked about Hannah's prayer at one point. Do you remember the prayer of Hannah? I don't know if you guys remember it, but we talked about the prayer of Hannah, that she wanted to have a son, and she ended up having a son named Shmuel, who was the one who anointed King David. So this is another woman that made a major decision by crying to God. She was able to have a child, and her child was in the temple for many years, and therefore her major decision for the Jewish people was that this child will be in the world and he will anoint King David. Now, if we go down further, we know that there's also on Shavuos, there's also a famous woman that has to do with King David. Anybody know her name? A famous woman that has to do with King David. An ancestor of King David. Huh? Did I hear something?
Bathsheba.
No. Bathsheba was later than King David. We're talking about an ancestor of King David. We're not.
Esther?
No.
Esther?
Esther was also later. Who was before King David, a couple of generations, and we read about her on Shavuot. Do you remember who she is?
Tamar?
Ruth. Remember the story of Ruth?
Right, Ruth.
She was a convert, right? She converted to Judaism. She came out of Moab, and she was an ancestor of King David. If not for Ruth deciding to convert and go back with Naomi to Israel, King David would not be in existence. So she was the major decision for the most important person. She made a decision to go back to Israel and to convert. So she is Ruth. She's a special person too. Also, not only Ruth, but if we just look at the mother of King David, do you know the story with the mother of King David? Her name was Nitzevet. So Nitzevet was married to Yishai, and Yishai was a third generation from Ruth. Remember, we talked about Ruth, but Ruth was a convert. So a lot of people were saying, oh, Yishai, his children are not really Jewish. He came from a convert that was from Moab. And if we know that it says in the Torah that a Moab person from Moab or Ammon should not convert. But it doesn't say a woman, a Moabite or Ammonite, doesn't convert. So it was an idea that they thought that because Ruth was from Moab, that Yishai was not legitimate. So Nitzebet, who was the wife of Yishai, left him, and they already had like 7 children. And later on, she quietly came back and she pretended that she was somebody else. And she had another child from him. She got pregnant. She had another child, and nobody knew that King David was from Yishai. They assumed that Nitzebet had a child with someone else. And the only way that they were able to find out at the end was when Shmuel, the prophet Shmuel, remember the one that Hannah had, right? He came to anoint a king, and he went from one person to the other. There were 7 children before David, or maybe there were 6 before David, I don't remember. But they came and they said, "Where's another child? We're missing someone." Shmuel says, "None of these can be the king." So they said, "Oh, we have a guy, he's in the fields. We don't know if he's really a legitimate child. He looks like he's a redhead. He looks very different. We're not really sure he belongs to our family." So Shmuel says, "Nope, I want to see him." So he went to see him, and he says, "Nope, this is the guy. This is the one that I have to anoint it." And Nitzebet started to cry, and she says, "You know what? This is really from Yishai, but I never said it because I didn't want to embarrass him. So now I'm just saying it because you're anointing and you're telling the truth. And so now you know that King David was really the legitimate child." And Nitzebet actually did make a major decision to keep it quiet, so that actually King David was brought up in the fields. So he was able to connect to other people. He wasn't like sheltered in an area. So he really connected a lot to other people. And therefore it was very good for him to be a king in that way. That was the story with Nitzebet. Then if we go on, we can also see, like she just said, Shlomo and Bathsheba. If you remember that Bathsheba was married and she had, her husband was killed in war, and King David took her and married her, and their second child was King Shlomo, who was the next in the generation to be a king. But if not for Bathsheba, he wouldn't become a king, because Bathsheba went to King David and said, "You don't understand how great Shlomo is." And she convinced him and she talked to him. And so she also made a major decision to make sure that King Shlomo, who was King Solomon, who was the smartest king in the world, and the one that united the whole world together, and the closest king that would be in the time of Mashiach. Such a kind of a person that he was able to unite the whole world, and everybody came during the time of King Shlomo to them. Okay. And then we also know one more woman from the story of Purim. Somebody said it already. Queen Esther, that she made a major decision for the Jewish people. What was this decision for the Jewish people that she made? She said that Haman was the one who wanted to destroy the Jewish people. She went to Ahasuerus and she saved the Jewish people. So she made a major decision, because if you remember, everybody, all the Jews, men, women, and children lived in Babylon at that time. And so if he would destroy all the Jewish people, that means every single Jew would be destroyed. So she made a major decision at that time too. And all of these women have a major role in Jewish history. The Kli Yakar said, women make major decisions. Why? If we look in Parsha Shalach also, God says, send for yourself, send men for yourself. But for me, who would I send? I would send women. When the Jewish people were in the desert, and God was saying that Moses was saying, we need to send spies to look at the land, God said, for you, you can send men. But if it was up to me, I would send women. And of course, we know the story. he sent the men, and the men sinned, and they ended up being in the desert for another 40 years. So anyhow, so we understand that women have more connection to Israel also than men do. That's this whole story with the Jews going into Israel, and Kli Yakar actually lived, I think in the 1600s. And could you imagine he said such a thing? So that means that he was not saying it because he wants to show that women are greater, because he's not a feminist or anything like that. But in the Jewish world, if you go look through the Torah, you see how many times women make major decisions. Okay, so here's an article. Let me share it with you. Okay, share the screen. I want to share this article with you. Okay. Okay, wait, where are we? Let's see where it is. Let me check. That's the meetings in Zoom. It's this one. Oops, where is it? Oh, it's back here. Oh, here it is. Okay. So here's an article that's written in the Jerusalem Post. Somebody want to read it? No, let me just get the cookies out of here. I don't need to accept any cookies either.
I can read it.
Okay, go ahead.
Much has been written and debated recently about the proper role and place for women in the corporate boardroom, on the synagogue Talmudical academic directorate, and especially within the synagogue sphere of spiritual and religious direction. Fascinatingly enough, a 17th century chief rabbi of Prague, Rabbi Ephraim Lunchitz, in his commentary Kli Yakar on the opening verse of this week's biblical portion, provides an important insight which may be helpful in our current discussion. Moses is about to make what is the most significant appointment of his career as master of the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu. He is about to designate the Advance Reconnaissance Committee, who will investigate the lay of the Promised Land and bring back a report to the newly freed Hebrews wandering in the desert. I refer to this as his most crucial appointment because God had initially promised the Hebrews whilst they were still in Egypt that they were to be taken out of their bondage and brought into the Promised Land of Israel. If this advance mission was to bring back a discouraging report about the prospects for their conquest of the land, God's plan and Moses' avowed goal would be thwarted for at least another generation. Hence, our initial biblical verse goes on to delineate each of the scouts as being, quote, a unique leader of the tribe of his fathers, each one a prince, unquote.
You see that we're not talking about just regular men. We're talking about men that were very high and unique in their own way, which is very interesting. So it's not saying that these men were like just regular men. These were the princes, right? Okay.
But the Kli Yakar in his commentary is struck by a pronoun that doesn't seem to belong in either syntax or context. And God said to Moses, send forth for yourself men. These scouts were not only to be agents of Moses, but were rather meant to be agents of God and the entire Jewish people, who were to continue the movement towards freedom and redemption by paving the way for the conquest of Israel. God should have said, send forth for us. And alas, as we know only too well from the continuation of our biblical portion, they totally discourage the possibility of conquest. Indeed, the very next chapter opens with all of Israel weeping aloud the entire night of the transmission of the report, causing the Midrash to identify it as the 9th day of the month of Av, the day of the destruction of both of our holy temples.
You see how much damage these men caused. It's very interesting to see. And here the Kli Yakar is saying if it was women, it would never happen. And the same thing we know at the Chet HaEgel, when the Jews worshiped the golden calf. Do you remember what happened there? What did the women do at the golden calf? Do you remember the story with the golden calf?
They took off their jewelry and put.
They did not take off their jewelry.
Oh,
The
they did.
men took off their jewelry. The women refused to give their jewelry. Why? Because that was done for something negative. And what did they use their jewelry for?
Who, the men?
No, for the tabernacle.
Oh.
To make a place for godliness, the Shekhinah, to bring down the Shekhinah, the godliness of God, to bring down into a temple, into a home for God. Could you imagine? I mean, look at the difference. Like here, we see the women have a special type of faith. Their faith goes very deep. Women not only do they love God and they care about God, but they also love Israel a lot stronger. They have a very deep spiritual connection to Israel. Very interesting that's why he's saying that, is because had they gone to Israel, what would happen? It would be completely different. It would be a whole different world. And we see not just in the old days, it was like that, but nowadays in the modern days, there's also other things that happen. Let's look at this other story about a hero that has to do with Israel too, in more modern times. Okay, does someone want to read Achana Senesh?
I'll try. Okay. Hannah Senesh was a young Jewish poet from Budapest who escaped Hungary in 1939, but parachuted back into Europe 5 years later as.
Oops. What happened? Oh my goodness, my thing is just like moving by itself. I didn't touch it.
5 years later as an Allied spy on a doomed mission to save Jewish lives. Hannah was born in Budapest in 1921 to a secular Jewish family of writers and intellectuals. Her father, Bela Senesh, a noted playwright, died when she was only 6 years old, and she was raised by her devoted mother, Catherine. As soon as she could read, Hannah became a writer. She started keeping a diary at 13, which she continued for the rest of her life. Although Hannah was assimilated and that did not protect her family against rising anti-Semitism in Hungary, she joined Maccabea, a Zionist youth group, and for the first time in her life, cared about being Jewish and was proud of her identity. At age 18, after graduating from high school, she made Aliyah, moved to the land of Israel, then British Mandate of Palestine. She settled on kibbutz Sadat Yam in 1939. Life at the kibbutz was difficult, and Hannah wrote vividly in her diary about working long hours in the kitchen and laundry. She continued her creative writing, penning poems as well as lively play about the kibbutz community. Hannah hadn't forgotten the world she left behind in Hungary and was determined to help her Jewish brethren escape from Europe, which was quickly becoming a death trap for Jews. In 1941, she joined the Haganah, the paramilitary group that later became the Israel Defense Forces. 2 years later, she joined the British Women's Auxiliary Air Force as an aircraft woman second class. Her goal was to return to Europe to fight the Nazis, and to save her fellow Jews. She was recruited into the Special Operations Executive, a secret British spy organization, and underwent intensive military training in Egypt. Her performance was so exceptional that she became one of the one of 33 people selected for the high-stakes mission. In March 1944, she parachuted into Yugoslavia, where she joined the partisans, partisans, right? A highly effective resistance group led by Josip Tito, later to be long-serving prime minister of the country. At this time, she wrote the poem, Blessed is the March. Germany invaded Hungary in March 1944 and immediately started deporting and murdering Jews with shocking speed. Fiercely, Hannah snuck into Hungary on June 7, ready to do whatever it took to save her Jewish brothers and sisters. Tragically, she was caught too soon after by Hungarian police working with the Nazis. She found her British military transmitter used to communicate with the SOE and promptly arrested her and threw her in prison. Immediately upon arriving at the prison, she was stripped naked and tied to a chair for 3 days, during which she was whipped and beaten with a club. She lost several teeth as they tried to force her to reveal the code for her transmitter so they could catch other resistance workers and parachutists. Desperate for Hannah to reveal information about the resistance activities, they tracked down her mother, hiding in Budapest, and arrested her, hoping that Hannah would talk to protect her mother. Period. Catherine, who had no idea Hannah was even in Hungary, was shocked to see her daughter for the first time in 5 years, missing teeth covered in bruises and malnourished. Together, the two Senesh women agreed they wouldn't help their captors in any way. Catherine was eventually released from prison and sent on to the famous Budapest Death March, but managed to escape. She hid in Budapest until it was liberated by the Soviets in January 1945. During several months of imprisonment, Hannah was beaten and tortured daily, but she amazingly refused to share any information about resistance activities. From her squalid cell, she used a mirror to flash signals out the window to other prisoners. She drew a Jewish star in the dust outside her window so those outside could see her Jewish pride. She was put on trial in Budapest for treason in October 1944. She used her moment in the spotlight to eloquently denounce Nazism and Hungarian complicity in genocide against the Jews. She refused to apologize for her actions or request mercy from the court. Hannah was sentenced to death. On the last day of her life, she wrote letters to her mother and her comrades in the resistance. As she was taken to face the firing squad in the snow-covered courtyard, she refused to wear a blindfold, forcing her killers to look her in the eyes as they shot her. Hannah was only 23 years old. Somebody at the prison, whose identity remains a mystery, made sure Hannah was laid to rest in the Jewish cemetery in Budapest. Her body was brought to Israel in 1950 and buried on Mountain Herzl in Jerusalem. In 1993, Hungary officially exonerated Hannah Senesh. After Hannah's death, poems were found in her prison cell, many of which have become songs written and performed by prominent Jewish singers such as Ofra Haza and Regina Spektor. Her diary and other writings were published in Israel in 15 editions so far. Hannah's tragic, inspiring story has been the subject of the multiple books and plays. A kibbutz and several streets are named after her, and every Israeli schoolchild knows of this legendary Jewish martyr. One of Hannah's most famous poems is known as Eli, Eli, My God, My God. It was put to music by composer David Zahari.
You can stop. It's okay.
The poem reads in part, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rustle of the waters, lighting of the heavens, the prayer of man. For risking her life to save her fellow Hungarian Jews and aspiring generations of Israelis, we honor Hannah Senesh as this week's Thursday hero. Get the best of accidental Talmud in your inbox.
Okay. No, that's just an extra thing. Okay, so we see here, like we look at this and we see even the Jewish woman that's not even religious and she doesn't really know much, but she has in her, she feels the pride of connecting to Jews, to connect to the land of Israel, connecting to every single person that's in here. I mean, we can look at this and say that the Jewish women make major decisions, not minor decisions. Okay, and we see also that the Jewish women were the first actually to go to a school. If we know in Poland and in many other countries, there was a school called Beit Yaakov, which was a school for Jewish women, actually founded by an amazing person named Sarah Schneerer. So this is amazing that we see how not only do the Jewish women in the Bible make major decisions, we see that in modern times, Jewish women make major decisions. And it says that because of the Jewish women, we were redeemed from Egypt. And because of the Jewish women in the future, we will be redeemed and brought to the Geula, brought to the redemption. So may we see this redemption very, very soon. And may we have Mashiach very quickly through the strength of the Jewish women. And it should be very, very soon and really just right now. Thank you.